We are not anywhere near a recession. I think the equity market has priced in some risk. I think crypto markets have their own kind of little tantrums. But I think in the end, the economy seems to be moving ahead. And I think we might need to wait until we're really fully into the earnings season and hear what the corporate executives saying in terms of what the outlook really is.
Friends, DeFi is having a moment. Uniswap Labs web app and wallet connect you to the excitement. Swapping and bridging are simple, low-cost, and lightning-fast across 13 chains, including Base, Arbitrum, and Unichain, the new Layer 2 network designed for DeFi. Thanks to deep liquidity on Uniswap Protocols, you get minimal price impact on every trade, now with even greater efficiency through Uniswap v4. Swap, send, on-ramp, off-ramp, and bridge into a bright future. Get started at uniswap.org. Bitcoin is up this morning, but 10x founder Markus Thielen says that if you're waiting for new all-time highs, you might be waiting until the end of the year. Despite this, he says that there are some crypto equities and alts that investors should be watching. Markus Thielen, welcome to Markets Daily.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course, now Bitcoin rose slightly this morning. Talk to me about what you were watching this weekend and what you're looking at as we head into a new week.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Of course, there were many upgrades, last week, various chains, around Ethereum, BNB and so on. I think a lot of stuff happened, but I think the whole geopolitics, the whole, Fed, I think that's the key driver, because that's eventually how people, judge liquidity. That's how people judge kind of like the risk on, risk off environment. We have been kind of focusing on this quite, intensely over the last couple of days. We were working for, we were looking for some hints from Trump. I think we sort of got them actually last Friday that, he's more flexible. So I think the bottom line for us was really that, with the S&P down, 10%, and we don't think there's any recession any near term, that we were sort of coming into the window where we probably saw some, the last bits of selling pressure. And I think we saw the market kind of reversing, last week on the Trump comments, B on Fed. We had, of course, the futures and options expiry, from the equity market. And of course, we're going into the last week of the quarter end, and quarter end usually has a lot of rebalancing, coming from pension funds, from real money investors, and, with bonds outperforming equities, significantly this month and this quarter, really. I think we're going to see some rally in equities. I think that's going to help Bitcoin overall.
All right, a lot there that I want to unpack. Yeah. Let's start with the tariffs. Signals that Trump might be a little bit more flexible on tariffs than previously thought. Talk to me a little bit about what that means for crypto markets and what that might look like from a global economic perspective when it comes to the rollout of some sort of tariff.
Yeah, I think that the 2 points really to note here is, A, he mentioned the word flexible, but also targeted. So those two words are really indicating that there is some, negotiation room, and there might not be as harsh as, expected. And of course, the implication here is that we might not see as a sharp increase in inflation as some people have expected. And I think that's really how the risk assets market have been really being really punished over the last couple of weeks. But I think if there's sort of like a repricing before the big April 2nd tariff day, really, that everybody has been eyeing, I think that's kind of like when the market starts rebounding. So it's really these two comments of flexible and targeted. That's really where the market starts to look through it as a risk off indicator from the tariffs.
Now, I want to come back to that Fed meeting that happened last Wednesday. A lot of talk of a potential recession before that meeting. We had Fed Chair Jerome Powell come out and through his remarks said, not really a recession in the Fed's eyes on the horizon. Talk to me about the potential for a recession. What did you take away from those remarks on Wednesday?
So it's not just his remarks in the post-FOMC meeting, but it's also his remarks on the week before. So during the week before, he also indicated that inflation might not be such a big concern, that the Fed might, use the word transitory again to really look through it. And I think that sort of like indicates really that there's probably some more rate cuts awaiting later this year. We are not too optimistic there's going to be any rate cut any time in the immediate future. So probably maybe only in September, but nevertheless, the market took his comments a little bit more dovish. We were of course expecting also dial back in the quantitative tightening. I mean, the Fed could actually also could have paused really. So they went sort of like, lukewarm really into the meeting. They sort of like, I think, delivered what people were hoping, but they didn't really deliver a lot more. So they still indicated they're going to be on pause for the foreseeable future, basically. But nevertheless, I think the market has been pricing in, as you correctly said, there's been a lot of talk about potential recession. I think we are not anywhere near recession. I think the equity market has priced in some risk. I think crypto markets have their own kind of little tantrums. We can talk about a little bit more in the later part of the discussion here. But I think in the end, the economy seems to be moving ahead, and I think we might need to wait until we're really fully into the earnings season and hear what the corporate executives saying in terms of what the outlook really is. But again, the market overall has priced in a 10% correction already, and unless we're really entering a real recession, I think then we might be going lower. But I don't think anybody really expects this, especially since the Fed has indicated the Fed put is really alive here.
Are we still expecting 2 rate cuts this year, or are you expecting to see 2 rate cuts this year?
I would expect 2 rate cuts, but they're probably going to be really in the later part of the year, probably sometime September, October, November, during that period. I don't think there's anything going to happen before the summer. The market is pricing in June as the first rate cut. I personally think that's going to be pushed out a little bit, but I think Powell has really kept these 2 rate cuts alive, and I think that's what the market was really looking forward to.
Now, you mentioned at the top of the interview that we're expecting to see an equities rally that will pull the crypto markets up with it a little bit. Talk to me a little bit about what you're expecting to see there, and how that's going to impact the crypto markets in the short term.
So we think that because we're going into the last week of this quarter, there's going to be a lot of rebalancing portfolio flows. So pension funds have made positive returns on the with their bond holdings, but lost on their equity holdings. So there's going to be some rebalancing, taking profit on the bonds, reallocating into equities, and we think that's going to kind of push equities up a little bit this week. When we're going into the earnings season, then next month there's still going to be some kind of caution around that. But I think in the end, Bitcoin, I think, will benefit. Altcoins, they look pretty bumped out, but I think there can be some, movements there as well selectively. But overall, we think Bitcoin can probably rally back into this 90 to 95,000 area. I don't think we're going to make any new all-time highs anytime soon, really, because there are so many kind of, from market structure to liquidity is not really that strong. So there's no real indications here that we're going to see a big push or big rally, really. And I think when we look at last year, we had a similar scenario where sort of, we rallied 1 month in February, and then we rallied another month in sort of October, November period this time. But then the rest of the year, we sort of went sideways, and we think we're a little bit in this trading range, but we still can make probably like 10% in this move. And I think that's kind of like what we're looking forward to.
When do you think Bitcoin hits its new all-time high?
Probably in Q4. I mean, we're a little bit conservative. We don't see any big catalyst. Of course, the market can change, very quickly. But, we don't think we're going to have any tailwinds really from the Fed until really Q4. We don't think there's any other big announcements, from the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. I think it was really, unfortunately, hyped up, a week before the announcement that they're going to buy all these altcoins, which they didn't do. There was all the expectations about revaluing the gold holdings, using some of the proceeds to buy Bitcoin. There was also the discussion about, the sovereign wealth fund for the US, which I think will happen. But again, the question really is, will this fund be financed by tariffs revenues, and those tariff revenues could be then used to buy altcoins. So it's a lot of kind of lots of ideas flowing around. But if really something happens, it might simply take more time. I think it's an interesting avenue that the market sort of like has forgotten now about the sovereign wealth fund, which it really seems to be happening because key people are being hired for this role. So I think it is happening. Something is really cooking in the kitchen here. But I think we don't really know a lot about what this actually does. And I think the market was hoping that the US will buy more Bitcoin. And again, the US hasn't even announced how many Bitcoins they would really put into this strategic reserve, right? I think the market is a little bit divided. There's, of course, a large part, belongs to Bitfinex, which is probably likely being returned. So in the end, the US might only have like a Bitcoin reserve of like 8 billion, which is like half the size of China's reserve right now, if you might call it reserve, or confiscated Bitcoins. So I think Trump would certainly not be happy if the US had the second largest strategic Bitcoin reserve. So something has to be announced there, but I think we are not there that we hear anything new here.
What would, just put this into context for our audience here, what would a sovereign wealth fund mean for the US in your eyes?
It means that there's a strategic view of accumulating assets, right? It's really like a buy and hold strategy where the US government also becomes like a partner, like an investment partner. We have seen this, of course, with all these sovereign wealth funds around the world, from Singapore to Norway, where it's really accumulating assets for the long term. And of course, this is really like a buy and hold strategy, which cannot be sold or won't be sold. And I think that kind of helps, of course, to squeeze asset prices higher. And I think that's what everybody wants who holds assets right now. And I think that's sort of like where we're going. And I think the idea, for example, is because of Doge and some of the tariffs that are being collected, that this is going to be put to work in a responsible and in a higher yielding strategy, right? I mean, the US can, of course, borrow something, at around 4%. A few years ago, some countries, even in Europe, that could borrow at negative interest rates. I don't know why nobody has really done it. And then really sort of like leverage up a little bit and put the money into assets that can yield, a lot more. I think we have seen this over the last, years, if not even decades. There are certain strategies, there are certain asset classes that generate more than 5% per year with a very low risk, really. And I think that's kind of the idea, that the US might actually issue some bonds and just have a benchmark of like 4% and trying to beat that. I think we have seen this from other countries that have sovereign wealth funds. And especially since there's a lot of valuable assets, that we have seen, all the tech companies and so on, they're, generating a lot more free cash flow and then a higher, earnings yield. And I think that makes sense to issue debt and buy, for example, shares of those companies.
I want to come back to alts. We were briefly talking about alts prior to this, and I want to ask you, how closely are you watching the assets that are being held by World Liberty Financial? Now, this is a DeFi project that is started by the Trump family. They hold a variety of different crypto assets in their treasury. How closely are you watching those assets, and are they outperforming assets that are not in that treasury?
I mean, the quick answer is, I don't think it really matters too much, right? I mean, the largest holding is Ethereum, and that went down a lot since they have bought it. So from a market timing perspective, it's not really a trigger or a key signal. I think we have, of course, seen many verbal interventions, from Eric Trump, really, that it's that Ethereum is a good buy. I think he said this at 2,800, at 2,400, at 2,000, and and lower and so on. So I don't think that really matters. I think what's more interesting is that the altcoin market is not just like one asset class or one category. I think it needs to be broken down into various sectors, and in sectors where there is momentum, where there is positive growth. But since really the Trump meme coin that was launched just a few days before its inauguration, I think the whole meme coin story also has, come down a lot. I think there's a lot of happening with, pump.fun and, how volumes, meme coin launches have declined. And, a lot of the other altcoins are actually not doing that well. So there's not really a lot of stuff happening in the DeFi sector itself. And I think this goes where your question is. It's more kind of like a DeFi play. But I think right now, nobody uses really DeFi per se. It's very different than during the previous bull market. When, of course, DeFi was offering, higher yields. And I think the idea there was really to take advantage of those yields, because there was a lot more leverage in the system. And of course, right now, the funding rates have really compressed to near zero. So there's not much speculation going on. And also, volumes in altcoins are very low. So there's not a lot of interest right now. So it actually takes probably something a little bit bigger than just being the Fed sort of like still indicating some rate cuts later this year for really the altcoin market to turn around. So it needs a new narrative. And we think that's going to be very difficult to really engineer right now. And I think that's why, yes, we are a little bit bullish right now, but we still think we're going to be in a big range.
Now, earlier you were talking about the equities market. Curious what crypto equities you're watching. I know this morning this story about Coinbase being in talks to acquire Deribit has popped up again. That's been a narrative that's popped up in the headlines a few times. What equities are you watching? Should we be watching Coinbase if they acquire Deribit?
Yeah, I think some of the crypto equities are quite interesting. I think, prices actually have come back a lot for the miners. When we look at miner revenues, they have still, contracted, a lot, but some of them have really, dropped by 50, 60%. So versus Bitcoin is sort of like down, 10, 50% from the high. So I think some of them might be quite an interesting levels, especially when we look at some of the data mining capabilities and relationships there, potential really relationships there. I think that's quite interesting. I think for somebody like Coinbase, I think you need to have more like a leveraged retail cycle. Really, I think we are sort of like at the top of the range for the theme versus I think the stocks. I don't think they express the right leverage. I think more like a diversified company, for example, like I think Galaxy would be quite interesting. And of course, the whole story around MicroStrategy doesn't really die down. I think the NAV, yes, the NAV has declined a lot from 300%. NAV overvalued basically to still like something like I think 80% now. So the shares are still quite overvalued, but I think people still buy into the narrative that MicroStrategy will become something bigger than just the Bitcoin holders, right? Something can be built around in terms of like a digital bank basically in the future. So I think that story, is alive, especially because volatility has, come back and it might be a sort of like a cheaper way to really to play like a more leveraged bet, as long as people believe that the NAV can still expand. Over longer time, we think the NAV is probably going to go back to sort of like a 1 level instead of being overvalued. But again, I think if we sort of like coming into, like a scenario, which was one of our biggest themes for this year, there's going to be a lot more IPOs happening. And we calculated there could be potentially something like, $130 billion worth of IPOs trying to be listed this year or early next year. There's going to be a big interest from Wall Street to keep actually prices for Bitcoin at least, quite high here, and to keep the story and the momentum going. Because again, there are so many investors that have invested a lot of these crypto companies, exchanges, and so on. And of course, they want to see some exit liquidity here. And for that, I think we need to keep the Bitcoin price high to offer that kind of exit potential for people.
All right, Markus, just before I let you go, for folks who are watching the crypto markets, who are investing in the crypto markets, what are 3 assets that they should be watching as we head into this week?
Well, we have been, focused on Hyperliquid, for example, right? There was a trade we put out, last week to our subscribers simply because it has, come back. And again, it has made a lot of headlines, right? There's a lot of headlines for people taking leverage positions. There has a lot of potential, I think, to grow. And it has a huge community. And I think this is what I was saying earlier with some of the altcoins that are seeing momentum. And I think that's kind of where investors should be focusing on, right? I mean, there's a lot of stories around, how Athena keeps developing. Yes, it has a lot of, unlocks coming over the next couple of, quarters and years. But again, the funding rates are very low. It has dropped a lot. But I think if we see a little bit of momentum building now in the funding rates, it can actually like expand again. I think that's kind of the, some of the stories that we are really looking at, and some of the, little nuggets here and there that I think are quite interesting. But we are not expecting like a broad altcoin rally simply because the macro forces are just not there. It's just sort of like here where assets have come back because they're sort of like really, sort of like bumped out. And, some themes, they seem to be, have sort of run their course. For example, this whole Solana and Solana ecosystem is sort of a little bit done, we think, because of the meme coin story. But other things like decentralized exchanges, I think it can come back when the volumes come back.
Markus, it is always a pleasure having you on Markets Daily. Thank you for taking the time today.